Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory, boring ancient history stories for sleep. Tonight, we won't talk about samurai. No whispers about honor, cherry blossoms, or polished steel. Tonight, we follow the footsteps of the forgotten, the Ashigaru, the peasant foot soldiers of pre-modern Japan, who made everything possible and got no credit for it. The earliest injustice, a quiet echo of a farmer's burden, turned into a soldier's. In the 7th century, the Yamato court summoned every young man into service, dragged to fight, though some had never held a spear. Buy your own armor, cook your own meals, survive on your own. You, among thousands, became the core of the army. Before we begin, if this feels like a quiet shelter in the middle of the night, hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly want to. Like the rules in an old tavern, you only come if you need a place to be silent. And you know what I love the most? Reading the comments, seeing where you're listening from and what time it is now. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 in the morning or 5, you're still here. And I see you. Now, dim the lights. Turn on a little fan if you have one. Not for heat, but for the soft hum. You wake up to the smell of damp earth and the cracking of your joints. Not incense, not birdsong, not the distant bell of a temple or the soft pounding of rice at sunrise, but someone snoring, name unknown, teeth grinding from the cold, and that clenched noise in the throat, where dreams were interrupted too soon. Only mud, heavy breathing, and a persistent fly aiming straight for your ear. You're lying on your side, cheek pressed against the ground, cold mud sticking to your face. Nearby, someone's gnashing their teeth, either freezing or being chased in a dream. Around you, a makeshift shelter, torn straw mats. Old canvas stretched between 2 bamboo trunks. No walls, no door. The wind comes in like war itself, slipping through every gap. Your bed is a patch of straw, soaked through since last night. It rained. You're not sure if it came from the sky, or was poured from some godforsaken corner of the sky. Your armor, technically, it's something that was once called tatami-do, pressed wooden slats bound by rope. It smells like time and mold, and 3 monsoon seasons ago. No family crest engraved, no lacquered paint, just creaking joints and the desperate hope that it might stop a frontal stab. Weapon, a yari, long spear, worn down wooden shaft. Its head chipped sometime during the July battle of the year 1376. Wood slats tied by rope, creaking like an old door. No gleaming sword, no warhorse, just one chipped spear and a pair of swollen feet from yesterday's run. You're not a samurai. You have no noble blood, no clan insignia. No one remembers your name. Not even the man sleeping beside you, who is currently using your calf as a pillow. You are Ashigaru. No title, no inheritance. Your name isn't engraved on a blade. It's scrawled on a bamboo tag tied around your neck. So if you die, someone might know where to gather your body. Samurai have crests on their armor. Your clothes don't match. Your spear doesn't match. Shoes, most don't have any. Barefoot, light-footed, in the most literal sense. No armor, no horse, no glory. A few camps away, someone sharpens a blade on a polished stone. Firelight flickers across a black lacquered mask, like the heroes in scroll paintings. They are samurai. They will charge on horseback, be written into poems. You will run. You will stab, you will fall, and if you're lucky, They won't step on your corpse afterward. You don't dream of being a hero. You just dream of living until sunrise. But sunrise will look like yesterday. Same signal horn. Same commander on horseback shouting from the hill. Same you, barefoot in the fog, not knowing why you must die here. Yesterday morning, one of your tent mates fell, struck in the belly by a stray arrow. His name, you don't remember, maybe never asked. He died in silence, and this morning, someone else has taken his place, and tomorrow morning is getting closer. No one tells your story, but tonight we will. We'll tell the story of the nameless, but not footless. We'll remember the Ashigaru, the silent backbone of war, the ones history forgot. Before they could say their final word, no one asked if you wanted to be a soldier. There was no invitation, no oath ceremony. Just a man in dark robes standing at the edge of the village, reading your name off a wooden plank, sloppy handwriting, but clear. That son from that house old enough, arms fine, teeth intact, go. And just like that, you became a soldier. Not for honor, not for the nation. You didn't even know what nation meant. Beyond the field you tilled each day and the village god statue at the crossroads. They told you to fight for the emperor, but you'd never seen his face. All you knew was, if you didn't go, your family would lose their share of rice next season, simply because you weren't old enough to escape the draft. It was the 7th century, more precisely, around the year 673 of the Common Era, when Emperor Tenmu issued a decree to establish a national army system called Gundansei. This system recruited soldiers from rural provinces, mostly farmers, and required them to serve for 3 years. But those 3 years often lasted longer, because there were too few strong enough to hold a spear, and war never took a break. Emperor Tenmu's decree to build a national army, a grand dream, gather men from provinces, teach them to fight. But here's a tiny detail no one mentions. Soldiers had to bring their own weapons. The government provided nothing. No spears, no armor, no food, no shoes. You went to war like it was early winter harvest, bringing a hoe, changing the handle, tying a blade into a spear. Armor? Your dad's old raincoat. Helmet. An upside-down basket with a charm painted inside. Some even strapped clay pots to their chests, as if ceramics could block arrows. Others wore 3 layers of straw, stuck their hands into bamboo tubes, and breathed hard, convincing themselves they were wearing armor. You looked around, saw yourself in an army of patched clothes and mismatched sandals. It felt like a puppet troupe dragged from the market straight into a battlefield. Your commander was a nobleman who'd never seen real combat. He wasn't chosen for victories, but because his father used to be an official. From the Kugyo class, the aristocracy, he'd studied more books than he'd ever swung a blade. Sometimes he went into battle in pristine armor, riding a white horse with a servant just to hold an umbrella. He spoke in classical Chinese and believed shouting "advance" was enough to scare the emishi into retreat. His strategy was charge straight or wait by the hill. So when you first faced the northern emishi, sometime in the 8th century, you realized instantly you were in the wrong place. They came from the cold forests up north, riding horses, wearing fur, and firing arrows while you were still wading through the mud. You heard the hooves before you saw the men. Before you could lift your spear, the man beside you had already taken an arrow, and you started running with the crowd, not knowing where to go. You were in the wrong place. The emishi rode horses. You had none. You ran barefoot, on an empty stomach. They fired arrows before they saw your face. That was the first time, and not the last. A farmer was forced to become a warrior by standing in the front line. You didn't know strategy. You just watched the fabric flag and ran when the person ahead of you ran. Each battle was a blind performance. Your role was to be the one who fell, whose name no one remembered. And yet, strangely enough, from those very falls, something new began to form. A class not quite samurai, but no longer simple peasants. They had brushed against the edge of war, survived it, and became the predecessors of the Ashigaru. Not voluntarily, not for honor, but because, when the draft came, you had no right to say no. You walk, the samurai rides. That's the first and deepest difference. It's not about skill, not about courage. It's that you move on feet, and they move on horse thighs. You leave the village at dawn, carrying a bundle of cold rice and a vague hope that maybe there won't be fighting today. They arrive later, from the high hill, with flags fluttering, shining armor, and an entourage in tow. You haven't eaten, but you're already running. They eat before they gallop. Samurai have their own horses. The horses are fed before the men. Not everyone is allowed to ride. That's a privilege of the warrior class. The horse isn't just transportation. It's a living symbol of status and power. Some samurai even hire a drummer to march ahead. Not to scare the enemy, but to let the villagers on both sides know, behold, noble lord is coming. They have caretakers, fleece blankets, soft hay, and even names like Hakumaru, East Wind, or Golden Flame. You have your legs, unnamed, except for the cracking sounds they make at day's end. If you're lucky, you have straw sandals tied with banana fiber. If not, your bare feet become permanent residences for mud, blood, and blisters. They say the battlefield honors the brave, but it seems the brave ones are usually on horseback. You hold a spear, sweat, and always march behind. In formation, you're the first to touch the ground, and the last to be named. They call you frontline soldier. Sounds heroic. But in reality, frontline is a polite way of saying, you're the live target for the opening act. You don't charge, you're pushed. They hold swords, you hold flags. They have clan crests. You have a rope tied around your waist to keep your pants from falling off. Samurai have people who polish their armor, each piece so bright it could reflect the incoming arrow. You polish yours with a river stone and rub it with leftover stove ash. They tie belts of red silk, embroidered with gold thread. You tie with palm rope, sometimes even the rope from your water buckets, to keep both your sword and your pants in place while running. You look up and see the samurai on the hill. They look down and see a dot, hunched under the burden of fate. And oddly enough, when the battle ends, the first to search enemy corpses is also you. You're not looking for loot. You're looking for a pair of usable shoes. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, you see a samurai sleeping, still holding his sword. When a samurai falls, someone calls his name. Someone builds him a grave. When you fall, someone might step on you because they were running too fast to stop. Your name isn't carved into stone. It's scribbled into the list of insignificant casualties. And you hold your stomach because you're hungry, and hold your eyes because you don't want to dream of being replaced by morning. You're dozing off after a long march, when someone wakes you with the one sentence you never want to hear in your life. The Mongols are here. In the year 1274, and then again in 1281. The first time was called the Boni invasion. The second was Koan. No one invited them. No one welcomed them. But they came anyway. People called both by one word: nightmare. No one clearly explained who the Mongols were. All you knew was they came by ship, fired arrows faster than you could remember your prayers, and made seasoned warriors look around for places to hide. In the 13th century, when the Yuan dynasty invasions touched the shores of Japan, Ashigaru, peasant foot soldiers like you, were summoned en masse, not because anyone thought you could defeat the Mongols, but because you could die first, just enough to slow them down. You weren't the front line. You were the sandbag, the soft barricade, the early phase casualty absorber. The enemy used hand bombs, flaming arrows, rapid fire crossbows. Nothing like any foe you'd ever heard of. They didn't wait for polite bows, no samurai duels. They rained volleys with short bows, repeating crossbows, and explosive fire weapons. Not modern bombs, but ceramic balls stuffed with gunpowder, exploding on impact, stunning entire lines of troops. For the first time, Japanese soldiers felt an explosion in their ears and had no idea what just happened. And you used untested courage, a spear with a cracked shaft, and a straw tunic tied with banana rope. You heard someone next to you shout something in a dialect you didn't understand, but shouted back anyway. Not to scare the enemy, but to scare the fear inside your belly. After each clash, people began to realize firing arrows from a distance was better than waiting for a samurai to charge in on horseback, and stabbing from the ground was just as effective if you knew how. Ashigaru, initially just the buffer layer, started to be kept around. Generals issued orders from the hilltop while you trudged through the mud below. They called it a layered tactic. You called it tiered death. The one pointing survived. The one holding the spear, life hung on the flip of a coin. Not because they loved you, but because you were cheap. No need to feed horses, no need for custom armor. Just blow the whistle and promise, if you live, you'll get a share. Some started getting trained with bows. Others learned to hold ranks, march in straight lines, step in rhythm like real soldiers. From living fences, Ashigaru began to form into ranks. But truthfully, most of the 1281 invasion was stopped, not by arrows or spears, but by wind. A massive storm, as fierce as the panic in your chest, swept away most of the Mongol fleet. People called it kamikaze, the wind of the gods. You called it a surprise vacation gifted by heaven and earth. From trembling ground, you began to stand as a force. After the battle, no one patted your back or pinned a medal. But something quietly began to change. People no longer brushed you aside. From being just farmers forced to wield spears, you and thousands of other Ashigaru became an indispensable option in every army. Not official, but present. Not glorious, but part of the formation. No one wants to be a living shield, but if you survive the first battle, people begin to look at you differently. Not as a farmer, but as someone who knows how not to die easily. You survived the Mongol massacre. You thought the war was over. But no, it just changed names. Northern and Southern courts, Nambokucho. This era began in 1336, when Ashikaga Takoji established the Northern Court in Kyoto, opposing the legitimate imperial court in Yoshino. No one truly controlled the entire country, but everyone needed soldiers. And you were easy to summon, easy to discard. Two courts, both claiming to be right. One in Yoshino, one in Kyoto. And you, in the middle. Like a stalk of straw being pulled from both ends. At this point, something strange happened. Ashigaru, for the first time, were recorded in writing. Your name appeared on the unit list, not as that farmer guy, but as Soldier Number 47, Squad 6, Frontline Team. You had a name, but not a title. A title is something carved in stone. A name is just something they yell during roll call. When you die, you vanish with the rain-soaked paper. Only your blood-stained shirt proves you once stood there. You weren't granted rank. You weren't given land as reward. No one asked your family name, because no one thought you'd live long enough to matter. The war dragged on like a never-ending winter. Battles erupted everywhere. It wasn't about foreign invaders anymore, but about Japanese cutting down Japanese over who was the real Japan. You didn't know which side you were fighting for. As long as there was rice to eat, and your spear wasn't broken, you went along. You once fought for a southern lord, then carried a spear for the north, simply because they handed out rice wages earlier. It wasn't betrayal, it's just that an empty stomach doesn't understand loyalty. People called you cheap soldier, not because you were useless, but because everyone could afford to recruit you. And so, in the chaos, Ashigaru became the backbone of these new armies. You were trained to march in step. You were given matching clothes, not for protection, but so you wouldn't accidentally strike someone on your own side. You were no longer just a support spear bearer. You played a real role in a war without right or wrong, only live or survive. You were like a wartime intern, doing everything, deciding nothing. And when something went wrong, you were the first to be yelled at. In a unit of 300 Ashigaru, maybe 299 would never be written into any record. But the battle was still won, thanks to them. History is sometimes built from nameless bricks, and Ashigaru were that foundation. Maybe a name doesn't define a person, but sometimes having your name written down is the only way to prove that you once existed, in a time where everything was easy to forget. You had your name in the military register. Now comes the part where you learn how to truly survive. Welcome to the Sengoku period, Japan's warring states era. After 1467, when the Onin War broke out and Kyoto turned into a pile of ashes, central authority shattered like a porcelain bowl hitting stone floor. No one ruled the whole land anymore, and when the center collapsed, the local lords, the daimyo, rose like shards with sharp edges. It began in the mid-15th century and lasted nearly 100 years after that. No more unified court, no more powerful emperor, just local daimyo, drawing their own borders and recruiting soldiers like gathering crops. They came to your village before dawn. A soldier shouted loudly, "Anyone still standing and not starving, get over here." You, the farmer used to ploughing fields, were now handed a spear. Not a wooden one like before, but real steel. Not for scaring enemies, but for killing or being killed. You were still barefoot, but now someone taught you how to hold a weapon. Training, unit divisions, marching drills, and most importantly, discipline. You were no longer a cheap add-on to the army. You were its spine. For the first time in your life, you wore matching armor, even if it was just leather lined with iron studs. The Oda, the Takeda, and later the Tokugawa clans began standardizing Ashigaru troops. You no longer wore your village's indigo shirt. but the proper colors of whichever daimyo you served. Sometimes it was a blue cloth tunic, sometimes black lined with mesh, sometimes just a red marking on the left shoulder. Not for style, but so that when you died, they'd know who you belonged to. A small flag was pinned to your back, so those behind wouldn't stab you by mistake. And you began to understand. Survival didn't lie in strength, but in uniformity. Same clothing, same commands, same footstep. And when 100 men marched in sync, spears raised together, even samurai began to look at you differently. Ashigaru now didn't just know how to fight, but how to obey. You began receiving orders like a professional soldier. Instead of charging randomly, you were split into squads, given commanders. The general points, you move. The general turns, you halt. Not because you respected them, but because going the wrong way meant dying faster. Whether Ashigaru or samurai, everyone knew. When the horn sounds, one person turning the wrong way could trigger a chain of death. And so, you began to see the necessity of following orders, matching steps, timing every beat. And then, new weapons arrived, matchlock guns. In 1543, a Portuguese ship drifted to Tanegashima Island, bringing with it a thunderous gift. From then on, the Japanese named the new weapon Tanegashima, after that island. The Portuguese brought to Japan a strange object that exploded like thunder. Ashigaru, once again, were the first handed one to try. You, who once held a hoe, now learned how to light a fuse, stay silent, and shoot straight. No noble background, no prestige. Just keep your hand steady, and your formation intact. Not everyone is born a warrior. But in times of war, those least named often decide the victory. And sometimes, a unit of Ashigaru marching in step echoes farther than a lone samurai's battle cry. People don't always kill each other. Even during Sengoku, the most chaotic wartime period in Japanese history, there were moments when people sat down and ate. October 1600. The field of Sekigahara reeked of iron, corpses, and ash. But in a ravine behind the front lines, a group of surviving Ashigaru gathered around a small fire. You sat under a pine tree, armor half removed, sweat still running, blood still sticky. In your hand, a ball of rice, no meat, just a salty scent. But it tasted better than any village feast you'd ever heard of. Next to you sat Tetsuo, once a carpenter. Across from you, Jen, once a thief, drafted for dodging taxes. No one cared who anyone used to be. As long as they could pitch a tent, sharpen a spear, and share pickled radish. No bowls, no tables, no bowing rituals like the samurai up on the hill. Just hands grabbing, mouths laughing, and a few mild curses when the rice turned out undercooked. The most common meal, cold onigiri, sandwiched between two sweat-soaked cloth pouches, sometimes stuffed with dried lotus root, found in the pouch of a fallen enemy, sometimes burnt fish flakes, shared in pieces no bigger than a fingertip. An old Ashigaru once said, "Eat like this, so if you die, your stomach remembers you lived." When you bite in, you can't tell if it's salted rice or the lingering smell of aged armor leather. But you eat, because tomorrow might not come to make you hungry. Every night, someone told a story, sometimes a ghost tale, sometimes a dirty joke. Someone even rewove the legend of Minamoto Yoshitsune. Except this time, instead of fighting battles, he was caught stealing royal rice. Laughter burst through the darkness. because in an age where dawn could mean death, people cherished the most useless thing. A funny story. When fire crackled in the dugout pit and you heard the samisen of a man who once wandered as a musician, you felt your back release. No more battle posture. No more wounds demanding a tight stance. The smell of ash, mud, and cold wind drifting through the ravine. The chill didn't come from the sky, but from the empty spot next to you, where a comrade fell yesterday afternoon. Only person beside person. No ranks needed. No horses, no banners. They say war turns men into warriors, but sometimes war is also the time. A soldier turns back into a person. In just a ball of rice, a burst of laughter, every Ashigaru, even nameless, carried a soul of their own. You've heard those stories. The Battle of Sekigahara, October 1600, is recorded as a glory of daimyo and noble samurai. But in that same battle, tens of thousands of Ashigaru died, buried in mass graves. No names, no funerals, no farewells. You've heard those stories. Loyal samurai, unyielding bushido, the soldier who falls kneeling, blade to heart, whispering their lord's name. You didn't get to choose how to die. A samurai might open their belly amid ceremony and war drums, leaving behind a death poem. But an Ashigaru died slumped while hauling supplies, face down in mud, blood soaking a half-swallowed rice ball. No honor, no choice. But you, an Ashigaru, only ever saw your comrades collapse in puddles of piss, rice still clenched in hand, and no one remembered their names. You once heard generals lecture about honor, that dying for your lord was glory. But when they fell, there were wooden statues, incense lit. When you fell, they stripped your armor to reuse it. The armor you wore bore no crest, no inlaid red bronze like the samurai, just a patchwork of old metal, hammered from scraps, heavy, stiff, and ill-fitting. The helmet tilted, the lining torn. You didn't wear it to be recognized, but so you wouldn't die too quickly. You had no family name, no clan, just your legs, blistered heels from 10 miles in the rain. Many Ashigaru who survived the Sengoku Wars lived quietly through the Edo period. No reward, no acknowledgement. Some became poor ronin, hired hands, hat patchers, wood sellers, no different from commoners. Some applied to temples as janitors, just to eat leftover rice. Memories of battle, if any, were swallowed whole by silence. In battle records they wrote, marched with 100,000. 100,000. No more, no less. Not you. When someone asks, where were your ancestors? You don't know how to answer. Because if history were a film, you weren't the main character. You were the boom mic holder. Steady hands, no shake. But no one remembers you in the credits. Because you are the ancestor of those who will not be remembered. History praises the ones on horseback, but it was built on the bodies of those who walked. On you. On every footstep dragged through mud. Every time you stood because no one else was left to stand. You're not in the legends, but you are the part of every legend that could never be replaced. You're still alive, but the war is over. A new shogunate is born. Peace takes the throne, and with it, the class door slams shut like a moss-covered wooden gate. You, an Ashigaru who survived Sekigahara, are now asked to return to being a civilian, a farmer, a laborer. As if that armored chapter of your life never happened. Before the decree was issued, Ashigaru training units were scattered across the land. You used to wake to the rapid calls, thrust low, block high, retreat 3 steps. Simple wooden training spears, sometimes just sharpened bamboo, were enough to form a wall of determined men. But then, everything fell silent, like someone had snuffed out the campfire. The dojo closed, spears collected, training fields became millet farms. You still remember the trainer bowing his head, quietly tying up the spears into a bundle. No farewell, just, from tomorrow on, no one needs to learn how to hold a spear anymore. In December of 1591, a decree was issued by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a man who had once been Ashigaru, stating, "Peasants are not allowed to leave their villages. Those who do so to become samurai must be punished." That was the end of the dream of rising, for tens of thousands who had lived and died on the battlefield. In the early 1590s, Hideyoshi, once Ashigaru himself, ordered the freezing of social classes. From now on, no one could change roles. Samurai are samurai. Ashigaru are Ashigaru. Peasants are peasants. And those who stepped out of their class were seen as mistakes born of chaos. You, once praised by a commander in battle, were now forbidden to carry a sword. You knew how to fight, but no one needed your fighting anymore. You were no longer a soldier, but the villagers didn't see you as one of them either. They looked at you with wary eyes, as if you brought something dangerous back from the battlefield. The samurai, who once stood beside you in battle, now didn't call you comrade. They stood on higher platforms and looked down at you as if you'd never bled for the same flag. You lived in between, belonging to no one, like a shadow moving quietly through collective memory, never mentioned. On the far edge of the village, someone stuck a broken spearhead into the earth, marking a rice field boundary. It was an old spear, dull tip, broken blade, but still kept as a reminder. Those who once faced death don't fear the sun. You saw that spear every morning, stepping into the field. It reminded you, you survived, and you fought, not for rank, but for the person beside you. You were banned from promotion, but no one banned you from holding your head high when walking into the market. You farmed clumsily, your hands better suited to spears than hoes, but you remembered how to stand tall, not lower your gaze, like when you stood in formation under the rain. You had no armor left, but you still had a spine. No title, but still your dignity. Society now was like a film where the cast was locked in from the start. You were the stuntman, risking all, bleeding, unseen. And when the war ended, they didn't need you anymore, because your name wasn't on the lead cast list. But you still remembered the real scenes, written in blood, sweat, and the screams of comrades. They thought that freezing the classes would freeze the hearts too. But for Ashigaru, belief never needed a decree. It lives in memory. It lives in the chest, where it once pulsed beneath tattered armor when war drums thundered. You're no longer called warrior, but your spirit still marches, just like in those days when you didn't know if you'd live to see the next sunrise. You are standing on the field of Sekigahara, morning of October 21st, 1600. No welcome banners, no name carved into your spear. You are an Ashigaru, footsoldier, stepping on dew and dead grass. No one asks if you're shaking. You know full well, one step too slow, and you'll fall with this grass, indistinguishable from all the others already down. Before Sekigahara, Japan was a tangled knot of power. After Toyotomi Hideyoshi's death in 1598, two major factions rose. Tokugawa Ieyasu, representing a new order of Eastern daimyo, and Ishida Mitsunari, a loyalist fighting to protect the legacy of Hideyoshi's young son. Ashigaru, foot soldiers from all regions, Kanto, Kansai, Chugoku, were hastily gathered. They didn't know the generals' names, didn't know the true meaning of the battle, only that they had to go, because if they didn't, their rice fields wouldn't exist either. History calls this the battle that unified Japan, but you know, it was also the battle that ended the dream of rising in class. One last time, you were allowed to stand beside samurai. One last time, you could hope. If you survived, you might be rewarded. And strangely, the battle unfolded like a grand play, where the ones wielding shining swords led, and tens of thousands barefoot ran behind them in the mud. You were the backdrop, but without you, no scene was complete. Tokugawa's Ashigaru mostly came from Kanto, barefoot, cotton-clad, bamboo spears in hand. Ishida's Ashigaru mostly came from Kansai, many conscripted, lacking even helmets. Meanwhile, samurai on both sides brought horses, iron armor. Some even carried Western muskets. On the battlefield, some marched to the beat of drums, while others just chased after shouted commands. Some had names sewn into banners, while others weren't called by name, not even in death. Sekigahara ended in the afternoon, when fog and gunsmoke mixed until no one knew who was who anymore. You didn't die, but there was nothing left to live for. Returning to your old village, you found your house burned down, your fields repurposed, your family gone or unable to recognize you. No one said, "Thank you for fighting." No celebration, no honor. You, once summoned in the name of the nation, had become a stranger on your own land. A day of dust, no name, no banner. Before the battle, you were given a red cloth to tie around your arm, to mark your side. But you knew, once blood splattered, everyone looked the same. The man to your left believed he'd be rewarded. The man to your right said, "If I survive, I'll marry now." And you just hoped the battle wouldn't last until night, because you couldn't see clearly in the dark. And your greatest fear was falling among thousands charging forward. You can't remember how many times you yelled, "Yah!" Can't remember how many times your spear hit only air. You just remember, the blood that hit your face belonged to someone, not enemy, not friend. At the height of chaos, the Ashigaru ranks surged like a wave. Spears pierced armor, staves broke mid-air. Sweat and blood mixed under faded cotton armor. You saw someone beside you fall, but you couldn't stop, because behind you were thousands more, and if you fell, they'd trample you. No room for emotion, only instinct, and the drum beats echoing from the ground. Tokugawa Ieyasu won. You didn't know that until hours later, when bodies started being dragged away. You were alive, but no one counted you. The ones recorded were the generals. The ones sculpted in statues were the samurai. And you got a handful of rice, a scrap of cloth, and a promise never spoken again. You survived the greatest battle of the Sengoku era. And then, you were asked to go back to being a civilian, as if nothing had happened. After Sekigahara, the Ashigaru class was no longer treated as comrades. They returned to being shadows, no armor, no names. Many were discharged. Many didn't know anything but fighting, so they became ronin, living as bodyguards or mercenaries. You, who once knew how to strike a spear through armor gaps, now learned to plant sweet potatoes, as if that were the only way left to survive. If every class is a candle, then Ashigaru were the fastest burning flame, lit when needed, extinguished without a sound, but its ashes still remain on the hands of the one who lit it. History doesn't name you, but you know you were there, at Sekigahara, where every dream either died or burned bright. You are no longer a soldier, but once you were faith itself. When the Edo era chronicles were written, no one mentioned the Ashigaru. Their names weren't in the samurai family trees, and there were no pages for them in the Dainihon Shi or Tokugawa Jiki. Their story, if it exists, survives only in oral tales. An old man in a village saying he once saw his father wear armor in his youth. An elderly woman remembering her brother left the village at 16 and never returned. Memory, that's the only thing left. And like all memories, it fades with time. There's a narrow path that leads from the hill down to the riverbank. On that path, the indentations of straw sandals still remain. No one knows who walked there, but every time it rains, water pools in those spots, as if the earth itself still remembers the ones who left their mark. Beside it, a small bamboo grove grows over what used to be the training ground of an Ashigaru unit. There's no memorial stone, but when the wind passes through, it rustles like the whisper of memory. You left no name, but you left a trail. You left no statue, but you left sweat, mixed with the dust of forgotten battlefields. There's a narrow path that leads from the hill down to the riverbank. On that path, the indentations of straw sandals still remain. No one knows who walked there, but every time it rains, water pools in those spots, as if the earth itself still remembers the ones who left their mark. You left no name, but you left a trail. You left no statue, but you left sweat, mixed with the dust of forgotten battlefields. After leaving the military, many Ashigaru didn't return home, but wandered from town to town, taking up lowly jobs. Some guarded stalls at markets, some pulled carts, brewed sake, or even acted as guards in festivals. No one called them soldiers, but when trouble came, people still looked for them first. Your child grew up not carrying a samurai name, but they learned to wrap rice with clean hands. They knew how to greet elders with their eyes. They didn't know you were once an Ashigaru, but they saw you never took the last bite of rice and learned what it means to give. They never heard the war drums you once heard, but sometimes, when the wind shifts, they turn their head as if they just heard something echo deep inside their chest. Your child grew up not carrying a samurai name, but they learned to wrap rice with clean hands. They knew how to greet elders with their eyes. They didn't know you were once an Ashigaru, but they saw you never took the last bite of rice and learned what it means to give. They never heard the war drums you once heard, but sometimes, when the wind shifts, they turn their head as if they just heard something echo deep inside their chest. If a child were to ask, "Were you a hero?" you'd shake your head and say, "No, I was just someone who stood behind another holding the banner. But I didn't run, and sometimes that alone is enough." A.T. The entire rise of the Inca Empire. No writing, no wheels, no concept of currency, no iron or steel, and no concrete fortresses. Yet by the 15th century, the Inca Empire controlled a territory of over 2 million square kilometers, stretching from the Andes highlands to the Amazon rainforest, from the Atacama Desert to southern Chile. They left behind no literature, no libraries, not a single constitution, not a single memoir. And the modern world, with its satellites, maps, and governance theories, is still left wondering, how did an empire without writing function with such order. This was not just an ancient civilization. Inca was an operating system, run by human memory, ritual, obligation, and a belief that the sun was at the center of everything. The story below is about an empire that once lived, not by words, but by system. Before the Inca ruled the Andes, the mountains were home to, and fractured by, dozens of different cultures, each one like a fragmented memory that time could no longer keep whole. The Andes was not an easy place to live. The climate shifted by altitude, the soil was steep, the weather harsh, earthquakes frequent, and the harvest unreliable. To survive, people had to farm on sheer stone terraces, store food in natural cold cellars, and share labor communally. Here, survival wasn't personal. It was a test for the entire social structure. South of Lake Titicaca, the Tiwanaku people once built massive stone structures, using blocks up to 100 tons, fit so tightly together they needed no mortar. But Tiwanaku stood out not just for their engineering. For many indigenous communities, this was the birthplace of the cosmos. According to legend, it was on the shores of Lake Titicaca that the god Viracocha, the creator deity, brought forth the sun, the moon, and humanity. Centuries later, Inca emperors still declared themselves direct descendants of the sun, born from those sacred waters. Not far away, the Wari created a vast inland road system connecting dozens of regions, from jungle to highlands, long before the Inca ever entered historical records. They also developed regional grain warehouses, standardized rectangular homes, and centralized governance, ideas that would later become the backbone of the Inca Empire. But around the 12th century, both these cultures collapsed, not due to war, but because of climate shifts, crop failures, internal conflict, and fragmentation. By the 13th century, the lands around Cusco were home only to loose tribal alliances, constantly in competition. The Quilque, the Chanca, the Colla, the Lupaca. No one was strong enough to lead. No one had the authority to unify. The Inca, then just a small group living off agriculture along the mountains, were not considered contenders for greatness. They had no great city, no strong army, no gold to trade. They had only time, and they waited. In that quiet space, after the old empires had fallen and before the new one rose, the Inca began to gather. The techniques of Tiwanaku, the organization of the Wari, the sun symbol from the sacred lake, then wove them into something new. The Inca didn't reinvent the world. They selected, modified, and recombined fragmented legacies. Like a shattered mirror, they picked up each piece and reassembled a new reflection, stronger, more connected, more resilient. A legend still retold says that the sun god sent two children, Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, out of Lake Titicaca with a golden staff to search for the right place to build an empire. When the staff sank deep into the soil of Cusco, they stopped. Maybe that legend is just a symbol, but it reveals something unmistakable. The Inca believed power came not from conquest, but from connection to sacred land. Cusco wasn't chosen for its military advantage. It was where the holy staff came to rest. For them, divine signals outweighed strategic maps. Historians never confirmed the myth, but the Inca didn't need proof. To them, light was ancestry, and the earth was destiny. The Inca Empire didn't arrive like a shooting star. It formed slowly, from the shadows of forgotten civilizations. The year was 1438 Common Era. The Cusco Valley fell into chaos. From the west, the Chanca army, considered one of the most terrifying military forces in the Andes, advanced with tens of thousands of soldiers. They carried wooden shields, stone spears, and something else. Human skulls. Real skulls, dangling from spears, still with hair and mud clinging to them. Weapons that couldn't kill anyone, but could terrify the people of Cusco. They did not come to negotiate. They came to destroy. When the news arrived, the reigning Inca king, Viracocha Inca, withdrew. Within the royal court, not everyone agreed. Some of the older nobles saw retreat as wise. Cusco could not withstand the Chanca's might. Others remained silent because the successor, Urco, had already been chosen. No one believed that Kusi Yupanqui's path was viable. Urco, the official crown prince, had shown no talent, nor did he have the support of the village chiefs. But by title, he was still escorted with the king to the highlands of Calca. They brought with them treasures, rituals, and symbols of power, as if the empire could continue elsewhere, leaving behind a dying Cusco. He did not organize a defense. He did not call for a last stand. Together with his chosen heir, Prince Urco, he left the city of Cusco, bringing the court into the mountains near Calca, abandoning the capital as it awaited devastation. Not everyone left. Another son, Kusi Yupanqui, chose to stay. He was not designated to inherit. He had no standing army, only a small group of loyal warriors and village chiefs who refused to submit. With them, he began to organize resistance. No one expected anything from him, but it was precisely at the moment of abandonment that the uprising began. Cusco then lacked not only soldiers, but faith. The people were used to a capital protected by the king and the gods, not by a forsaken prince. But Kusi didn't persuade with words. He persuaded with action, reorganizing the defense, rallying the loyalty of local leaders, and personally leading small raids against the Chanca rear guard. The Inca, under Kusi's leadership, used terrain tactics, ambushes, and guerrilla strikes to push the Chanca out of Cusco. In legend, even the stones rose to fight for him. Boulders transformed into soldiers, hurling the enemy out of the valley. These stone warriors were called Pururaucas, beings awakened by the gods to defend Mother Earth. Many believed it was a miracle, but others suggested it was a psychological tactic. The Inca may have placed hundreds of stone statues shaped like warriors along the mountainsides to make the Chanca believe they were surrounded. Whether myth or military strategy, the story has survived for centuries. Because it wasn't just about stones. It was about a people who believed the land itself would fight if they stood up for it. When victory was certain, the people welcomed Kusi as a reborn hero. He rejected his old name. From then on, he called himself Pachacuti, meaning the one who overturns the world. In Quechua, Pacha doesn't just mean world. It also means space, time, and cosmic order. Kuti is reversal, overthrow, rebirth. That name wasn't merely a declaration of victory. It was a prophecy. Pachacuti didn't just save Cusco. He would rebuild it from the ground up, with a new order, a new creed, a new definition of empire. Cusco, under his hand, would not be just a capital. It would become the center of the universe. Not metaphorically. He would truly do it. Overturn the structure, redefine the empire, and usher in the greatest era in Inca history. Cusco, after the victory, was like a wounded body that had just survived its death throes. But the wounds were not just physical. Cusco was a ceremonial center, the place where all roads of the Andes converged. And so, when it fell, the Inca's belief in the order of the world was shaken to its core. The stone walls had collapsed, granaries were empty, families were torn apart in flight, and faith in the Inca royal family had yet to return. But Pachacuti did not try to patch the cracks. He tore everything down and built it anew. Rebuilding Cusco from valley to cosmos, he ordered the demolition of most old structures and redesigned the city of Cusco in the shape of a jaguar, the sacred beast symbolizing power and natural order. The jaguar's head was the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, built from stones weighing over 100 tons, fit so tightly that a blade could not pass through the cracks. It was not just a military structure, but a declaration in stone. Inca power was built on the eternal, inseparable. The spine was the main road system. The jaguar's eyes were the ceremonial plaza, where the largest festivals were held. Cusco, under Pachacuti's hand, was no longer a city, but a living symbol of the cosmos. Every road radiated from the central plaza like rays of energy, connecting more than 40 provinces of the empire. Social reform, from tribe to state. Pachacuti understood that to control a territory stretching thousands of kilometers, military strength was not enough. He needed a system to mobilize people as one mobilizes resources. He developed the mita system, a recurring obligation of communal labor. Instead of taxes in gold or food, people paid their share through time and labor, building roads, digging irrigation canals, joining the army, or transporting goods with llamas. Thanks to mita, the Inca Empire built a road network over 24,000 miles long, food storage throughout the highlands, and rope bridges spanning deep ravines that still astonish modern engineers. He divided the territory into 4 regions, Tawantinsuyu, 4 united parts, each under the control of loyal governors. Every community was required to contribute people for labor, military service, or infrastructure, under the system called mita. For the first time in Andes history, power was no longer based on kinship, but on centralized administrative management, building belief from mythology to politics. Pachacuti elevated the god Inti, the sun, to the center of the national belief system. He built the temple of Coricancha, the most sacred shrine of the empire, with its inner walls gilded in gold, reflecting sunlight like the gaze of the divine. Within the temple grounds, he created a golden garden where rice plants, llamas, birds, and even cornfields were crafted from precious metals, as an eternal manifestation of prosperity. Coricancha was not only a place of worship, but a cosmic axis. All major ceremonies were held there, and from it, sacred roads were drawn to connect the entire empire along spiritual lines. He built Coricancha, gilded the inner walls, as a place to worship the sun god and Inca ancestors. He declared that he himself was a direct descendant of Inti, not metaphorically, but as a sacred bloodline. This not only reinforced his personal authority, but turned the emperor into a living link between humans and gods. In less than a decade after Cusco's victory, a small tribe nearly consumed by war had become the center of the largest empire in the Western Hemisphere before the year 1492. And the one who did it was not a warrior, not a prophet, but an architect of order. His name was Pachacuti. If Hammurabi wrote the first laws, if Qin Shi Huang built the Great Wall, then Pachacuti, with memory, mountain stone, and divine faith, rebuilt an entire world after collapse, with Cusco as the heart and the provinces as veins. The Inca Empire under his hand did not just expand territory, It expanded the concept of order, of duty, and of unity. While the Egyptians carved hieroglyphs into stone, and the Mesopotamians wrote on clay tablets, the Inca, the largest empire in the Western Hemisphere before the 16th century, possessed no written language at all. No law code was ever recorded, no epic ever written on paper, no letters, no documents. Yet this empire still existed, grew, and operated with astonishing precision. Quipu, memory made of thread. Instead of an alphabet, the Inca used quipu, bundles of cords knotted in a system of colors, lengths, positions, and shapes. To the modern eye, quipu resemble a kind of handcrafted fiber database. The knots are bits, the strings are code, and the reader is a processor who knows how to move. A string wasn't just a unit, it was a command. Red might indicate population, yellow meant gold or silver, green stood for crops. The knots on each string represented specific data, and the position of the string in the quipu bundle showed its informational hierarchy. Quipu wasn't a dead record, it was a living memory. Only those with special training, called quipukamayok, could read and re-speak the stored information. These quipukamayok were not just memorizers, they were auditors, accountants, and historians. They were sent to local communities to track population, agricultural yields, military numbers, or stored goods. Each of their missions was like a silent audit, but without pen and paper, only thread and memory honed through ritual. No one wrote, but everything was remembered, and that memory moved through the system. Chaskis, messengers who never sleep. To ensure information was delivered swiftly, Pachacuti organized a rapid messenger network called chaskis. Each chasqui acted like a living link in the national nervous system, running non-stop, memorizing accurately, and never getting lost. Along the highways, he built tambo, rest stations spaced 1 to 2 miles apart, where chasqui could be refreshed, replaced, and pass on their messages via quipu. These chasqui were athletes trained to live on mountaintops, running relays across a highway system thousands of miles long. On average, an urgent message from Cusco could reach the Pacific coast in just 2 days, thanks to seamless handoffs between stations. Each chasqui carried a message pouch and a quipu bundle, like a body in motion carrying the empire's memory. The Inca Empire's administrative structure was clearly hierarchical. Laws weren't carved on stone tablets or written in books. They were sung during festivals, sworn aloud before the community, and repeated through generations via rituals and melody. Commitment was not written. It was stored in memory, upheld by reputation, and witnessed by the community. Each ailu, the basic community unit, had a village chief in charge of mobilizing labor and production. Every 10 households had a curaka, manager. 10 curakas formed a higher level, reaching the provincial curaka, who answered directly to the central government in Cusco. All processes, from land distribution and labor assignment to festival organization, were remembered, carried out, and passed down orally and through knots. No paperwork. Just precise memory and communal responsibility. The Inca Empire proved something that stunned Europeans when they arrived in South America. A state could govern millions of people without writing a single word. With accuracy, coordination, and speed, no other nation of that time could match. Because sometimes, control doesn't require writing. Only people who remember like stone and run like wind. When the Spanish conquistadors first set foot in the Andes Mountains, They thought they had stumbled into another version of Rome, but built from stone and wind. They found highways stretching from the Amazon rainforest to the Atacama Desert, from the coast of Ecuador to mountain passes over 3,000 meters high, from sparsely populated valleys to golden temples at the empire's heart. Total length, more than 24,800 miles, longer than the Roman road system, and not a single map. No signs, no markers, no carved symbols, yet every Inca citizen knew exactly where they were. From the farmer in the Vilcanota Valley to the soldier stationed in the Puna Highlands, each person memorized the road like a sacred ancestral song. The path wasn't written on paper. It lived in the mind and in the rituals of daily travel. The Inca had no wheels, no iron, no compass, but they created a transcontinental road network of astonishing precision, using sun-shadow measurements, star navigation, and a kind of map stored in memory. Each terrain type was handled with unique techniques. Flatlands were paved with smooth stones. Mountain slopes were built into staircases like stairs to the sky. Landslide-prone areas were layered with crushed rock and moisture-retaining clay. Inca roads didn't just resist erosion. They channeled water, drained floods, and blended into the landscape as if born from the mountain itself. No iron, no compass, but they created a transcontinental road network of astonishing precision, using sun-shadow measurements, star navigation, and a kind of map stored in memory. These roads were paved with flat stones, built in tiers, erosion-resistant, with drainage channels, flood control, and rest stops at regular intervals, called Kapaknyan, the road of power. They connected more than land. They connected obligation, communication, and ceremony. Unlike Rome, where all roads led to the central city, the Incas' Kapaknyan network spread like tree roots, serving every small village, every terraced field, every grain depot. This was not a network for cities, but a living system for an entire society, from sacred peaks to remote valleys. Where mountains were steep or ravines deep, the Inca didn't build stone bridges. They braided dry grass into rope, weaving suspension bridges ranging from 10 to over 100 meters, capable of bearing pedestrians, pack animals, and armed soldiers. Each bridge lasted about a year. Then the entire community gathered to restore it through a collective ritual. It wasn't just infrastructure. It was a sacred thread connecting people and Pachacuti himself. Before construction, villagers offered tribute. As they wove, they sang ancestral songs. When finished, they celebrated as if completing a holy rite. Each suspension bridge was not just for crossing, but proof that the community remained united, still remembering the way home to the empire. On the roads were shaski, tireless messengers. There was the military, moving twice as fast as any enemy. There was religion, with processions carrying the sun god from Cusco to distant lands. And there were storehouses, inns, and guard posts, allowing the Inca state to oversee the entire empire without paperwork, through movement, memory, and road. The Inca road wasn't made with mortar or steel. It was built from collective will and sacred ritual. Though no longer whole, thousands of miles are still visible from satellites today. The longest stone engraving of a civilization without writing. A nation with no documents, because everything was woven into the earth. Every mile of road was not just a path, but evidence of an empire woven from memory, responsibility, and ceremony. No street signs, no milestones, only people following people year after year, keeping the road from vanishing and the empire from fading. If the roads were the arteries of the Inca Empire, then suspension bridges were the veins suspended in the sky, both fragile and unyielding. In the deep canyons of the Andes, where even rock trembles and earth refuses to stay still, the Inca didn't build rigid bridges. They created structures that breathed, able to sway, able to tremble, but never break as long as there were people to maintain them. In the bottomless ravines along the Andes, where stone bridges were impossible, the Inca did not give up. They twisted fibers of Coya ichu grass, a wild plant that grows above 3,000 meters, into ropes as thick as an arm. And then they connected mountain to mountain. No bolts, no cement, only grass, human hands, and memory of the right way to do it. The bridge wasn't built, it was woven, like a carpet stretched across the abyss. Once a year, the entire village gathered to repair the bridge. The ritual began with an offering, followed by 3 days of communal labor, and ended with a celebratory inauguration feast. Women braided the small cords. Men twisted the large ropes. Children learned to tie knots by watching their grandparents. No craftsman had a blueprint, only collective memory, accurate to every twist, every taut strand. The Queshuachaca Bridge near Cusco, more than 30 meters long, still exists today and is still repaired annually in this way for over 500 years. It is not a reconstruction for tourists. It is a living ritual where the 4 communities of Huinchiri, Chalpibanda, Chocaiwa, and Kalanakehui carry out the exact steps as their ancestors did, from the 15th century to today. In 2013, the bridge was recognized by UNESCO as intangible cultural heritage, not because it is beautiful, but because it is alive. There is no manual describing the bridge, no engineer with a title, but the bridge lives and pulses blood through the Inca Empire. They remind us, some civilizations leave behind no libraries, but leave behind works that only survive if people still remember and still trust one another. That bridge doesn't just connect 2 cliff edges, it connects the memory of the 15th century with the footsteps of the 21st. When a child walks across the bridge, they are not just crossing space, they are crossing time, stepping onto a thread woven by ancestors out of faith. The Inca Bridge is not a relic, it is a living system. If 1 year is forgotten, the bridge will tear. If 1 generation forgets, the bridge will disappear. Each strand is the crystallization of communal discipline, unwritten tradition, and cross-generational volunteerism. A structure maintained not with steel, but with ritual and a spirit of collective responsibility. When Spain destroyed cities, burned storehouses, and searched for gold in temples, the grass bridges were still repaired, because they did not belong to the state. They belonged to village memory, to the responsibility of each child, and to the belief that as long as the bridge remains, the empire is not lost. In the Inca world, metal was not the strongest. Grass, if maintained through memory and willingness, could connect centuries. That bridge does not stand by gravity, but by the living memory of a civilization that had no need to write. The Inca Empire was born in the mountains. It lived off the land and expanded by road. But among the stories passed down, there is one detail that always makes historians pause. An Inca emperor went to sea, not just out to fish, but sailing thousands of miles to a distant land on a fleet of wooden boats bobbing on the waves with no compass. only stars and wind for guidance. His name was Tupac Inca Yupanqui, son of Pachacuti, the emperor who rebuilt the empire from its ruins. Tupac Yupanqui succeeded around the year 1471 Common Era, after proving himself through northern military campaigns. Not only did he expand the territory all the way to Ecuador, he also became the first, and possibly only, person in Inca history to dare look toward the ocean. The air brought the Inca Empire to its peak, and possibly was the first to cross the Pacific Ocean, even before Magellan. According to 16th century Spanish chronicles, Tupac Yupanqui led a strange sea voyage to a land called Nina Chumpi and Hawa Chumpi, roughly translated as Ring of Fire and Ring of Wind. He set sail with over 1,000 men, carrying gold, llamas, craftsmen, and returned with black slaves, exotic treasures, and animals no one had ever seen. Sounds like legend? Maybe. But this theory has inspired more than a few modern scholars to investigate. In 1947, Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl built a balsa wood raft in the ancient style and named it Kon-Tiki. He set sail from the coast of Peru and reached Polynesia after over 100 days adrift, proving that a journey like Tupac Yupanqui's was entirely possible, not with maps, but with wind, stars, and determination. Records from Sarmiento de Gamboa, Inca Garcilaso de la Vega, and Spanish friars all mention the story, with wonder, but without denial. If Tupac Yupanqui truly went to sea, he might have reached Polynesia. Some theories even suggest he landed on Easter Island, bringing back wooden statues, giant fish, and a strange rice not found in the Andes. No map was preserved, no ship survived. Only legends and odd artifacts in temples, seashells not native to the Andes, wooden statues with styles unlike any local art, and plants like yams, later discovered to share genetic origins with those in Polynesia. Scattered clues, but if pieced together, they may form the fragments of a real journey. And in the hearts of the Inca people, Tupac Yupanqui was not just a king. In folk songs passed down through the centuries, he appears as a symbol of wisdom and courage, the one who dared defy traditional fear, leaving behind the sacred Andes to explore places no Inca had ever seen. He was proof that even within an empire rooted in the mountains, there could still be a longing for the sea. He was the one who left the mountains and went to sea, in an empire without a navy, in a realm governed by strings, remembered by memory, and travelled on foot through mountain roads. Tupac Yupanqui's voyage was a tear in the order. It was like Galileo peering through a telescope, or Leif Erikson crossing the North Atlantic. No one expected it, but when one person does it, the world is no longer the same. Tupac Yupanqui may not have written a voyage journal, but if what he did was real, then grass didn't just connect mountains, it opened the ocean. Before the Inca moved northward, another empire had ruled the arid coast of what is now northern Peru, from around the 10th to the 15th century Common Era. They were the indirect heirs of the ancient Moche culture, and through sophisticated irrigation techniques, they transformed a barren land into the greatest coastal power of the pre-Inca era. An empire that did not build temples in the mountains, but carved its power into sand and flowing water. Their name was Chimu. Their capital was Chan Chan, the largest mud city of the ancient world. And their fate was to become the Inca's first lesson, that sometimes water is stronger than weapons. The Chimu had no Andes for protection, no highland forests as shields. They lived on salty wastelands, where if the rain could not be summoned, the water had to be commanded. And they did. They diverted the Moche River through a network of canals that crossed the desert. They built hundreds of reservoirs, ritual lakes, and salt filtering ponds. They turned mud into walls, sand into fortifications. Chanchan was not just a residence, but a ceremonial city of water. Walls decorated with fish, ocean waves, flowing currents, and every temple block shaped like a hydrographic map. In those dry mud walls, the Chimu preserved not only architecture, but belief that water was the soul of the world, and if humans still knew how to guide it properly, the gods would stay with them. Around the late 15th century, the Inca came from the Andes. Pachacuti was old. Tupac Yupanqui was conquering the north. They did not strike immediately. They went upstream and altered the flow. According to many post-conquest records, instead of a direct assault, the Inca quietly built new canals, diverted the Moche River, and caused Chanchan's irrigation system to dry up. The desert returned, not with storms, but with the deliberate absence of a current. When the water stopped flowing, Chanchan stopped breathing. Chimu weapons rusted in their hands. The guards withdrew. The people left the city on their own, because there was no water left to breathe. The Inca didn't need to fire a shot. They made an empire thirsty and let it fall on its own. After capturing Chanchan, the Inca did not destroy it. They preserved the architecture, learned from the artisans, and brought Chimu craftsmen to Cusco. Among them were goldsmiths, shell carvers, and silver artisans, who later helped shape the Inca royal artistic style, carrying with them the aesthetic language of an empire that had fallen but never disappeared. No one told the story of the war. No one recorded the moment of collapse. Only empty reservoirs and the cracks on dry mud walls, as evidence that, if you wish to defeat the sea god, take away his reign. In their journey of imperial expansion, the Inca learned one thing. You don't need to break a city if you can bend the water. You don't need to destroy a civilization if you can make its land undrinkable. At the center of every Inca road, every ritual, every campaign of expansion, there was always a presence that could not die. Not a king, not a priest, but the ancestors, those who had died, yet were not allowed to leave the world. Mummy cult, when the dead still attended the royal court. The Inca believed that an emperor did not die. He merely transitioned to another state of existence, mummified, preserved in form, and still in possession of land, offerings, and his own servants. Royal mummies were often kept under special conditions, placed in Cusco or highland regions where the cold, dry climate naturally preserved their shape for centuries. Some rituals even brought mummies to sacred mountaintops, like the famous case of La Doncella, discovered atop Lulailaco, dated around 1500 Common Era. These royal mummies were placed in private chambers, dressed in feathered cloaks, crowned, and brought to festivals as official members of the court. They were carried on golden litters, accompanied by guards and servants, and appeared before crowds like incarnate gods, even though they no longer breathed. Sometimes, people even offered personal gifts like food, woven cloth, or whispered prayers, placing them in the mummy's hands like letters to a ruler in the afterlife. They even attended royal meetings, with officials sitting opposite them and interpreting the will of the dead. It wasn't gods ruling over humans. It was the dead ruling the living, when a king passed away, he was not fully succeeded. His son would take the throne, but only inherited new lands. All territory belonging to the deceased remained in the possession of the dead, that is, the mummy, and was managed by the deceased's own lineage, complete with its own resources, servants, and treasury. This led to a strange consequence. Every new king had to go conquer, not out of ambition, but because he needed land to rule, since all the old land was held by the dead. In fact, many scholars believe this inheritance system created the endless drive for expansion in the Inca Empire. A large part of the military campaigns of Pachacuti, Tupac Yupanqui, and Huayna Capac stemmed from the need to acquire new territory, not just for glory, but simply to have somewhere to govern. War wasn't just for power. War was to avoid living off the dead. Religion wasn't faith, it was administration. Inca religion drew no line between life and worship. The sun was the king was the son of the sun. Corn was blood, the land was the body of the ancestors. They didn't have scattered myths. They had a ritual system linked to social governance. Whoever farmed in a region had to worship a particular deity. When chicha beer festivals could be held, when fasting was required, which mummy was to be moved to Cusco in June, and where it was to be seated. Everything was as precise as an administrative calendar. Belief was programmed so that no one could forget who ruled, even if that person had died 100 years ago. Inca belief did not make people afraid. It made power present without being physically there. Unlike ancient Egypt, where mummies were buried deep underground and power ceased, the Inca allowed imperial mummies to continue living as entities that owned property. In a sense, the Inca Empire operated as a two-dynasty system, one court of the living, and a parallel court of the dead, still receiving tribute, still bestowing blessings, still owning land. An Inca emperor didn't need to appear, didn't need to issue new decrees. As long as his mummy was properly worshipped, everyone would still follow his will. Immortality did not reside in the body, but in property that was never reclaimed after death. In the Inca world, death did not mean the end. Death was simply another way to keep ruling. Huayna Capac was the final peak of Inca royal power, and the first to rule beneath an invisible shadow. Not an enemy army, not a rebellion, but a fever from ships never seen before. The king of the widest domain. Throughout his 40-year reign, Huayna Capac expanded the Inca territory to its furthest extent, from the highlands of Quito in the north to the Maule Valley in the south, stretching more than 4,000 kilometers. He was a strategic ruler, extending the road system, redrawing administrative divisions, and continuing to reinforce the two dynasties system between the living and the mummified. Cusco at the time was like a colossal heart, pumping power across the Andes and drawing offerings from hundreds of subdued peoples. Fracture from the unexpected, the north. Around the year 1525 Common Era, while staying in Quito, a northern territory he had recently conquered, Huayna Capac fell ill. He wasn't wounded, he wasn't assassinated, but quietly burned with fever, delirious, and died within a few weeks. No one knew what it was, but later generations would. It was smallpox, a disease brought by the first Spanish expedition from Panama. When Huayna Capac died, Cusco didn't know. By the time Cusco found out, his heir, his son, Ninan Coyote, had also died of the same cause. Collapsed not by sword, but by a funeral unheld. The Inca Empire had no writing, Succession had to be confirmed through ritual, noble approval, and divine sacrifice. But when both father and son died without leaving instructions, all of Cusco fell into chaos. Huascar, the surviving son, was elevated to emperor. But in the north, Atahualpa, the son more favored by Huayna Capac, claimed the right to rule Quito. No one declared war, because they were brothers, but no one stepped down, because they were sons of the dead, and no one had yet completed the funeral rites. A symbol of an empire without immunity, Huayna Capac did not die in defeat. He died having never encountered this kind of enemy, one that needed no sword, no flag, only an invisible passenger on a rat-infested ship. And so, the Inca Empire followed that path, not collapsing from a single battle, but from tiny fractures that spread from a mummy not yet laid in sacred rest. The Spanish had not yet arrived, but death had. And in the highest reaches of the Andes, where people once believed power to be immortal, the empire had already begun to unravel from something no one could see. No one knows the exact day the Inca Empire began to collapse, because by the time the Spanish arrived, it was no longer a unified entity. It was being split in two, not by enemies, but by two heirs bearing the blood of emperors. Huascar, who took the throne in Cusco, represented the conservative nobility, the traditional line. Atahualpa, in the north, in Quito, was backed by the army, a companion of his father in earlier military campaigns. Both were sons of Huayna Capac. Both were called Inca by their people, and neither would yield. From 1527 to 1532 Common Era, 5 bloody years, two halves of the empire fought each other using the very armies of the Inca. There was no rebel faction, only two power centers, each claiming legitimacy. Huascar rallied the highland nobility and held Cusco. Atahualpa had elite forces from the Quito region, supported by veteran generals. When Atahualpa finally won, Cusco was seized, Huascar captured, the entire old court executed. But at that very moment, the Inca Empire had yet to recover from 5 years of civil war, when a new force from beyond the Andes reached its shores. Pizarro, who had crossed Panama with his brothers and learned to conquer natives through cunning rather than numbers, now appeared like a small wave just as the Inca tide had ebbed. At the moment, Atahualpa was consolidating power. He had no idea. The strangers had not come to negotiate, but to replace. They brought not just weapons, but an entirely different way of understanding the world. Writing, Catholicism, a colonial administrative system. To the Inca, every ritual was part of cosmic order. To the Spanish, power could be measured in guns, gold, and bound by treaty. From the very first moment, the two worlds did not speak the same language, and not just because of Quechua. Pizarro did not arrive with an army. He came with a carefully rehearsed play. When he invited Atahualpa to Cajamarca, he had soldiers armed with muskets and cannons hidden inside a former monastery, horses concealed behind gates. Atahualpa arrived with thousands of attendants, none of whom were armed, thinking this was merely a diplomatic meeting. The first explosion, the sound of gunfire, didn't just kill his entourage. It shattered the image of the invincible ruler in the eyes of the Inca. In 1532 Common Era, Francisco Pizarro and about 180 Spaniards landed in the Tumbes region. They didn't know Quechua, didn't know who was king, had no maps, no clear native alliances, but they arrived at the perfect moment. The entire empire was exhausted, just emerging from a plague, grieving a dead king, and fresh from civil war. The Inca army, though vast, was scattered and distrustful within. In fact, when Atahualpa was captured in Cajamarca, Inca forces still numbered over 80,000 soldiers stationed outside the city. They were only a few miles away, but no one dared act, because under Inca power structures, only the king had the authority to command an attack. And at that moment, the king was locked in a small room, beneath a gun no one had ever seen. Pizarro invited Atahualpa to the city of Cajamarca. In just one day, he was ambushed, taken alive, and held in a small room. Tens of thousands of Inca soldiers did not attack, not because they were afraid, but because there was no unified command. Huasca was dead. Atahualpa was captured. No one had the rightful authority to give an order, or to be obeyed. In the heart of Cusco, the room where Atahualpa was imprisoned became the strangest symbol of colonial power. Not a throne, but a wall marked by the height he pointed to, demanding it be filled with gold. The Inca brought gold, silver, sacred statues, ritual cups, melted it all. But the king was not released. And when Atahualpa was executed, there was no ritual, no burial, no mummy. Only the sound of metal clanging against stone, and the blank stares of thousands of people who no longer knew who ruled the world they once believed eternal. Francisco Pizarro did not destroy the Inca through war. He captured the king and ruled from the shadows. He named a ransom in gold, and the people of Cusco brought it. He killed Atahualpa, and no one had the authority to retaliate. Not because the Europeans were too strong, but because the Inca no longer knew who their king was. There is a bitter paradox. The Inca Empire could build roads longer than Rome, string grass bridges over ravines, run a government without writing. But because they had no writing, they left no warning for those who came after. When the Spanish recorded the story, they did not write of a proud empire fallen. They wrote of a treasure seized, a king captured like a game, a civilization that had never written a letter, but once held the mountains. The Inca had no writing, so no one documented that lesson. Only future generations looking back can see. When an empire collapses, it doesn't start with war, but with inner fatigue. And when the Europeans arrived, they simply walked into an empty room, where the throne still stood, but no one remained seated. The lawgiver of Sparta, Lycurgus. At the beginning of the first millennium before the Common Era, the Greek peninsula was undergoing a turbulent transitional period following the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, a once flourishing and highly influential culture in ancient history. This era, known as the Greek Dark Age, saw a sharp decline in population, knowledge, and social organization, causing many regions to fall into chaos and fragmentation. The reasons behind the collapse of the Mycenaeans around the 12th century before the Common Era remain a subject of debate, but many scholars agree that factors such as internal conflict, natural disasters, and especially the arrival of the so-called Sea Peoples, groups that landed along the Mediterranean coast, contributed to the disintegration of the Mycenaean kingdom's power structures. As cities burned and the Linear B writing system was forgotten, Greece entered a time without historical records, without commerce, without architecture, a period when people lived more by myth than by law. In southern Greece, the region of Laconia, later to become the heart of the Spartan city-state, was not immune to these trends. The Dorians, a warrior tribe originating from the north, conquered and settled the area, taking over what remained of the Mycenaeans. However, early Sparta was not yet the unified and formidable polis of legend. Instead, it was a divided society with fragmented rule, governed by two co-ruling kings who inherited their power through hereditary lines. Although power was shared, the dual kingship was often plagued by internal conflict and a lack of stability in governance. The two-king system, also known as the diarchy, likely originated from the unification of two separate clans or communities during the early formation of Sparta. In theory, the two kings ruled jointly with equal authority, serving as supreme military commanders and religious figures. In practice, however, this model frequently led to power struggles, particularly in a time lacking mechanisms for regulation and arbitration. This inconsistency and absence of consensus at the highest level of leadership left Spartan society directionless and vulnerable to political crises. The prolonged disorder and chaos created a fragile state, placing Sparta at risk of losing control and weakening in the face of external threats. At the same time, society was deeply divided economically and politically, marked by emerging groups of subordinates, serfs, and a warrior class that was still undefined. In the daily life of pre-reform Sparta, instability was reflected in rudimentary architecture, unplanned gravel roads, and cramped, inconsistent housing. Inequality was apparent in clothing styles, stratified religious rituals, and the open disdain between social groups. While the aristocracy took pride in their warrior bloodline, the rest lived in dependency and impotence, excluded from important political decisions. There were virtually no clear written laws to govern relationships between social classes, only vague oral customs and traditions. This social disarray and lack of collective spirit rendered Sparta a land on the verge of explosion. Previous reform efforts, if any, had failed to yield long-term success due to the absence of a unified legal foundation. In scattered councils, people spoke more of past glory than the nation's future. Those with reformist aspirations were often pushed aside or viewed as threats to traditional interests. The central question hanging over Sparta in its tense atmosphere was not who held power, but who was capable of rewriting the rules for all. A warrior city-state needed a unified ideology, and someone with the authority to bring it to life. In such circumstances, the urgent need for a skilled leader with far-reaching vision and the ability to organize society effectively became essential to saving and rebuilding Sparta. It was in this era of great turmoil and looming collapse that Lycurgus, a semi-legendary figure regarded as the great lawgiver of Sparta, began to emerge, promising a profound revolution in the city-state's political, social, and military systems. In the history of the Spartan city-state, no figure is as symbolic or as elusive as Lycurgus. He left behind no written records, no clear birth or death dates, and even his very existence remains a matter of scholarly debate. But his influence as a lawgiver and the organizer of Spartan society is undeniable. According to legend, Lycurgus was the younger brother of King Polydectes in the early 8th century before the Common Era, during the post-Dark Age period, when Sparta was transitioning from chaos to statehood. When Polydectes died without a son, Lycurgus was appointed successor. However, when the king's wife became pregnant and gave birth to a son, Charalaeus, Lycurgus immediately relinquished the throne, serving only as regent until the young king came of age. That action, however, did not earn him trust. Many in the royal family and aristocracy suspected him of harboring ambitions for power. To avoid conflict and bloodshed, Lycurgus voluntarily left Sparta, embarking on a journey across many lands, from Crete, Egypt, and Lydia to even India, where he observed various systems of political, legal, educational, and military organization. In Crete, he admired collective discipline and the public education system. In Egypt, he was impressed by the strict separation between the military and civilian classes, a model that would later influence the structure of the Spartiates. In Asia Minor, he learned how to intertwine law with sacred ritual, something he would later use to grant Spartan law an aura of inviolability. This journey was not just physical, but intellectual. Lycurgus carried no army and harbored no ambitions of conquest. He carried with him a deep concern for a Sparta rotting from within, divided, consumed by personal ambition, morally decaying, and directionless. Armed with knowledge from many civilizations, he returned to Sparta, not to be king, but to restore order. Before returning, he visited the temple of Apollo at Delphi to seek an oracle from the Pythia, who prophesied, "The nation that follows Lycurgus's laws will become the most renowned in the world." Backed by divine approval, he easily persuaded the now-grown King Charillus, the aristocracy, and the citizens to grant him authority to draft new laws. But instead of writing them down, he introduced a set of principles to be memorized, what Spartans called the Great Retra. He restructured Sparta's entire political, economic, and social system, laying the foundation for a militaristic totalitarian model, where all male citizens became soldiers, women gave birth to soldiers, private property was abolished, land was equally distributed, and all individual interests were subordinated to the collective. Once the reforms were complete, Lycurgus summoned the entire population, from king to commoner, and made them swear not to alter a single law until he returned. Then he set off for Delphi once more, but this time never to come back. According to Plutarch, Lycurgus starved himself to death, a final act meant to bind Sparta to its unchangeable oath. He turned himself into a living legend, then vanished, so that no change to his reforms could be made without offending the very soul of the city-state. Lycurgus left behind no title, no will, no property. What he left was an order, protected not only by law, but by the sacred memory of a man who chose death to preserve an ideal. While other lawmakers wrote with ink and parchment, Lycurgus wrote with sacrifice. In a world where laws were usually written, sealed, and protected by documents, the political system of Sparta stood firm for centuries, thanks to a constitution that was never written down. A living constitution held in memory and custom, the Great Retra. The word retra in ancient Greek means speech or utterance. From its very name, the sacred and oral nature of the Spartan constitution is clear. It was not an administrative document, but a divine proclamation, a form of political revelation from the gods. According to ancient records, it was the god Apollo at the temple of Delphi who revealed to Lycurgus the ideal structure for his city-state. The unwritten nature of the law, therefore, was not a deficiency, but a sacred intention, affirming that Spartan law was eternal, needing no revision, and best left unwritten to prevent human interference. Unlike Athens or other Greek city-states, where democratic assemblies and written laws were foundational, Sparta chose another path. Its laws did not come from representatives or paper, but from oaths and tradition. The Great Retra was never written down, but every clause was memorized and preserved as a kind of civic religion. According to historian Plutarch, the Great Retra was the result of a blend between practical observation, Lycurgus's experiences during his travels, and the sacred pronouncement from Apollo at Delphi. Upon his return to Sparta, Lycurgus brought not only a social model, but a revolutionary political formula. This constitution established 4 foundational pillars of the Spartan state. First, the dual kingship system. 2 kings ruling simultaneously, not to check one another, but to balance power between the 2 royal families, Agiad and Eurypontid. Both held authority in military and religious matters, but were limited in legislative powers. Second, the Gerousia, Council of Elders, consisted of 28 citizens over the age of 60, and the 2 kings, responsible for drafting legislative proposals and judging serious crimes. This council embodied wisdom and stability, representing life experience and a timeless perspective. Not only a legislative body, the Gerousia served as the city-state's living memory, where knowledge was passed down orally through generations. In a society without written laws, old age and memory became the symbols of legal legitimacy. Every decision of the Gerousia was not only a rational deliberation, but an enactment of a living tradition, tested by time and embedded in collective consciousness. Third, the Ephoroi, Council of 5 Overseers, elected annually from the citizenry, held enormous power, supervising the kings, administering the judiciary, and regulating public life. Though not of noble lineage, the Ephoroi represented the principle of mutual checks and balances. Fourth, the Appella, Assembly of the People, comprised all adult male citizens, with the power to vote yes or no on the proposals of the Gerousia. Though limited in authority, it was the only foundation of popular participation in the Spartan regime. One of the unique aspects of the Great Retra was its rejection of written law. Lycurgus believed writing laws made them rigid, prone to manipulation or alteration. A law remembered would be safeguarded by reverence and protected by the collective, not fixed clauses. This also transformed Spartan law into a ritual rather than a document. When disputes arose, people did not cite texts, they cited the spirit of the Retra. And to do so, they needed consensus from a community that had lived and grown up with that law. The Great Retra was not just a legal framework, but a definition of identity. It made Spartans live by discipline, compliance, and silence, but also spared them from superficialities. In a society with no coins, no lavish architecture, and no written laws, it was spirit that shaped greatness. In that context, every Spartan citizen was not just a beneficiary of the law, but a guardian of its living memory. And that was Lycurgus's greatest success, turning an unwritten constitution into something stronger than any written code, a living moral covenant between man and city-state. Under the light of the Great Retra, Spartan society was organized into a strict and closed hierarchical system, where every person was defined not just by role, but by their capacity to submit to collective ideals. 3 main classes formed the foundation of this society: Spartiates, Perioikoi, and Helots. Compared to other Greek city-states like Athens, where citizens could be merchants, poets, or warriors, Sparta chose a completely different path. True citizens, Spartiates, had only one role, being warriors and nothing but warriors. Whereas in Athens citizenship extended across many social groups, in Sparta it was limited to a small community, each man trained to die for the state. However, the supreme position of the Spartiates carried a quiet tragedy. Their numbers steadily declined. By the early 5th century before the Common Era, there were only about 1,000 Spartiates, a number too small to sustain a standing army, yet too large to do without the helot class. Strict marriage traditions, the agoges' harsh training, and high battlefield mortality meant this elite class declined with no replenishment from other strata. One factor both sustaining and limiting the Spartiates was their rigorous educational and communal system. Boys were taken from families early to live in military training environments, strictly monitored in behavior and thought. Evaluated solely on combat ability and obedience, the society left no space for talent in the arts, ideas, or economics, an absence starkly contrasting with Athens. At the top of the pyramid were the Spartiates, the state's formal citizens. Descendants of the original Dorian settlers of Laconia, they were lifelong warriors. Each Spartiate was granted land, not to farm, but to hold as part of their military duty. In Spartan society, status came from discipline, loyalty to the retra, and readiness to sacrifice, not wealth. Spartiates did not farm, trade, or create. They were full-time soldiers. From age 7, a boy entered the agoge, a collective training system, learning to fight, endure, lead, and remain silent. Only at 30 did he become a full citizen with voting rights in the appella. Yet Spartiate power did not mean personal freedom. They were forbidden to leave Sparta without official order, continuously monitored by the ephoroi, and ate in military mess halls called syssitia, where bland meals reminded them they belonged to the collective, not themselves. 2. Perioikoi, the people of the surrounding areas. The second tier were the perioikoi, literally dwellers around. They lived in villages and towns around Sparta, neither slaves nor citizens. Perioikoi served vital economic roles. They were blacksmiths, carpenters, potters, merchants, and auxiliary soldiers when needed. Though barred from political office or the formal army, they could travel and trade, freedoms denied to Spartiates. They served as a bridge between Sparta and the wider Greek world. Remarkably, despite being the majority free population, perioikoi never rebelled or demanded political power. Protected from military burdens like the Spartiates and not oppressed like helots, their position was secure enough to live, but not aspired beyond. 3. Helots, the state-owned serfs. At the bottom, and most oppressed, were the helots. Unlike Athens' personal slaves, helots were legally tied to the land and considered state property, making systemic oppression possible with no personal accountability. Helots were mostly descendants of the conquered indigenous people, especially the Messenians conquered in the 8th century before the Common Era. They had no land, no education, no weapons. They farmed allotments given to Spartiates and surrendered most produce as tribute. As state-owned serfs, they could not own or inherit land and lived stripped of autonomy. To control them, Sparta established a secret force called the Crypteia, elite youths tasked with assassinating helots showing resistance. Each year, the ephoroi declared a symbolic war on the helots, making their murders not crimes, an institutionalized, brutal, legalized oppression. Though exploited, helots were indispensable. They sustained the warrior class and the Spartan economy. And precisely because of this, they were a constant source of fear, a political pressure cooker that the entire system had to watch constantly. Sparta's three-tiered social structure wasn't an open system. It was a closed ecosystem, where each class was fixed by law, custom, and mutual surveillance. Every individual was a non-replaceable piece, born to play that role. And in that absolute binding, Sparta found stability, but also planted seeds for instability to explode later. If Athenian democracy praised intellectual diversity, Sparta believed that the stability of a society came from tightly controlling each individual, starting when they were still a child. And that's why the agoge system was born, a comprehensive, rigorous, and harsh training program lasting from age 7 to 30. As soon as a boy turned 7, he was taken from his family and placed in a communal barracks. All emotional bonds were severed and replaced by one singular loyalty, to Sparta. From then on, he belonged to the agoge, a military, survival, and ideological training system where weakness had no place. The first lessons weren't letters but endurance. Children had to get used to hunger, cold, physical pain, and public punishment. Fighting was encouraged, not out of brutality, but to foster resilience and a competitive spirit. The winner was praised, the loser humiliated, not to shame but to drive improvement. One of the strangest tests of the agoge was stealing without getting caught. Students were intentionally underfed, so they'd be forced to steal food. If they succeeded, they were praised. If caught, they were punished, not for stealing, but for the carelessness of being discovered. Plutarch tells of a boy who hid a small fox under his cloak to pass the test, but the animal clawed his stomach from the inside. The boy remained silent and died from the wound, never betraying the agoge's lesson: endure to the very end. Besides fighting, children learned to read, write, sing, dance, and speak publicly. This holistic training wasn't meant to produce well-rounded individuals, but to ensure every warrior could lead, inspire, and maintain order within their unit. They were taught to speak briefly, sharply, and to the point, known as the laconic style, a rhetorical form Sparta was famous for. Short, cold, sarcastic responses were proof of a mind that could control emotion. At 18, the best students could be recruited into the Crypteia, a secret assassination force used to control the helots. They had to live alone, without blankets, without fire, equipped only with a knife and their wits, ambushing rebels, killing without a trace. This was the ultimate exam: to survive like a shadow, to kill like an invisible man. At 20, the young man was allowed to serve in the official army, but was still not considered a full citizen. Only at age 30, after completing the agoge and being accepted into a syssitia, a communal mess hall of the Spartiates, did he become a full citizen with the right to vote in the appella. Agoge was not just education, it was rebirth. A child was born by family, but recycled by the state to become a living instrument of Sparta. Every scar was a medal, every hunger a trial, and every sacrifice, no matter how small, contributed to maintaining order. It's no exaggeration to say Sparta didn't just train soldiers. They forged a class of people ready to die in silence, kill in darkness, and live for one ideal. Sparta is everything. Unlike most Greek city-states, where women were confined to their chambers and excluded from public life, Spartan women held a prominent social and cultural position, partly due to economic reasons, partly due to the survival needs of a highly militarized society. From a young age, Spartan girls were encouraged to train physically: running, wrestling, discus throwing, horseback riding, with the same intensity as the boys. But the goal wasn't to fight in battle. It was to become strong mothers who could give birth to strong children, the future Spartiates. They also learned to read, sing, and even debate, something rare in other ancient societies. A Spartan woman could look a general in the eye and say, "Come back with your shield, or on it." As Spartan men spent most of their lives on the battlefield or in the barracks, women gradually became the managers of property and finances within the household. According to Plutarch, by the 4th century before the Common Era, Spartan women controlled up to 2/3 of the land in the city-state, a proportion far exceeding other ancient societies. This wealth did not come with overt political power, but it gave women real influence over family decisions, especially in marriage and the upbringing of the next generation. Spartans dressed simply, used no perfumes, and wore no flashy jewelry. The custom of syssitia, communal dining, was not only for men. In many ceremonial occasions, women played important roles in preparing, organizing, and passing down ritual etiquette. The Hyacinthia festival and the Artemis Orthia festival are prime examples, where women participated in singing and dancing performances, athletic competitions, and ritual offerings, activities both sacred and socially binding. The freedom of Spartan women did not come with indulgence. If a wife was seen as lazy, physically unfit, or gave birth to weak children, her honor and that of her family would be affected. In fact, if her husband died in battle without an heir, she could be officially allowed by the state to remarry another warrior, to serve the warrior ideal. A Spartan mother sent her son to war not with tears, but with a command. Either return with your shield, or don't return at all. Spartan culture, from customs to gender roles, all reflected one core belief. Sparta did not exist for the individual. Each individual existed for Sparta. Within that model, women were no exception. They were an indispensable part of the harsh machine called the warrior. After completing the most crucial reforms, Lycurgus did not declare retirement or assume a powerful advisory role. He chose to disappear. He gathered all citizens, including both kings, and forced them to swear an oath to continue abiding by the constitution he had established until the day he returned. What they did not expect, Lycurgus would never return. He left Sparta once more, traveling to Delphi, the place that had once issued the prophecy endorsing his earliest reforms. There, according to Plutarch, Lycurgus fasted until death, as a way to seal the oath he had imposed. If he did not live to break it, then Spartans would have no excuse to do so either. That quiet, unceremonious departure created a kind of immortality. He had no tomb, no monument, no body, but he had a system that every Spartan was born to continue and protect. It was precisely the vagueness of his biography, the ambiguity of his death, that made him an eternal symbol. No other lawgiver in the Greek world left such a clear, comprehensive, and enduring legacy. More than a legislator, Lycurgus became a standard. Spartans did not debate reform, because his laws were not to be amended, but lived with. No one dared to claim the right to replace Lycurgus, for no one knew whether he had truly existed, and that made it all the more sacred. For centuries afterward, from victories over the Persians to the Peloponnesian War, from the rise and fall of Athens, Sparta resolutely followed the path Lycurgus had carved. Every sword forged, every child separated from their mother, every drop of sweat and blood spilled on the training ground was how they kept their oath to a man who had vanished. Lycurgus left no throne, but he left something more important, a nation that could live through memory. an ideology written not in stone, but in belief. And thus, he became a man no one buried, because he never truly died. In the history of the ancient world, few figures have left such a profound mark, while remaining so enigmatic as Lycurgus. He was a legislator, a symbol, and a legend all at once. And it is precisely that ambiguity that makes his legacy all the more enduring. No one knows exactly when he was born, when he died, or even if he truly existed. But the Sparta he built truly lived. It existed, it fought, it commanded the respect of all Greece. A small city-state with no walls, no gold, no theatre. Yet it could dominate the Peloponnesus with sheer iron will. The institutions he laid the foundation for, from the unwritten constitution, the Gerousia Council, the Ephoroi structure, to the Agoge training system, lasted longer than any other political model of the time. While many city-states changed constitutions with every political shift, Sparta remained loyal to its unwritten laws, etched not on paper, but into the collective mind. More important than the system was the spirit Lycurgus left behind, the sacrifice of the individual for the collective. No personal glory, no absolute individual freedom, only one supreme ideal. If Sparta exists, then so do we. Still, Lycurgus's legacy was not without its dark sides. The Crypteia system, the oppression of the Helots, the institutionalized brutality, all were part of the structure he created. But that is also the paradox of every great order. Discipline always comes with sacrifice, and stability often requires invisible offerings. Today, Lycurgus's name is still invoked in works of history, philosophy, and politics. Some see him as the model of natural law. Others criticize him as the architect of an inhuman society. But from any angle, Lycurgus remains a figure impossible to ignore. A man without a tomb, who left behind an entire city-state as his epitaph. Sparta declined. But the name Lycurgus still stands tall, not in marble, but in repetition. Every time we speak of discipline, collective morality, and absolute loyalty, we are, whether knowingly or not, walking again the path he once laid down. And in that way, he never leaves history.